Hello YouTube, my name is Isabella and today I'm going to attempt to do a review for The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. I say attempt because I tried to do my review, literally was just filming for 18 minutes and had barely scratched the surface on this story or my review and my thoughts. I am incredibly conflicted over Addie Larue. There's a lot of elements that I like in this story and there's a lot that I disliked, and it's making this review incredibly difficult. I'm sure you know what this story is about, so I will give a very easy, glossed over pitch for this story, but essentially it follows a girl who makes a kind of stupid deal, a Faustian deal with this devilish character in which she will get immortal life, but is cursed to be forgotten by every single person who she crosses paths with. And you basically follow two timelines, her in the present day and her in the past, learning the limitations of her curse, and things sort of change in like our present narrative that kind of changes Addie's world, or throws Addie's world upside down. I was anticipating it. I was excited for this book, albeit a bit nervous because I've been struggling with V.E. Schwab a little bit in the past, and I don't know if I love her books as much as I used to, but that is not entirely relevant to this review. But I was excited for it and let down. I would like to note that while I do have complicated feelings on this story, I don't hate this book. I did like elements of it, and that's why it's kind of so disappointing to me, because I saw its potential and I think it could have been fantastic and as good as what V.E. Schwab was making it out to be. But the execution, I think, definitely gets flubbed, dropped the ball, and I'm going to attempt to explain why. We'll see. Normally I start off with world building, but because this is a contemporary fantasy, I'll just discuss her curse when I discuss plot. But I'm going to start off with characters, because the characters are what I struggled with the most in this story, and I think that's why I disliked it as much as I did, because I'm a character-based reader, and if I don't like the characters, it's going to be a struggle. And when I'm reviewing something, if I mention that I didn't connect with the character, it's not because I find the character unlikable or I can't relate to them. I don't have to relate to a character to enjoy their perspective or understand where they're coming from. These characters I found to be incredibly lackluster and bland and supremely underdeveloped, and therefore I did not connect with them, and therefore I did not connect with the story and their overall plight. This is not a very action-driven or plot-driven thing. It is, the plot is driven by the characters, and because I didn't like the characters, I didn't ultimately like the story. We're going to start off with Addie. She's our main perspective character. She was flat. Come on. Like, she was flat. I don't understand how we managed to experience 300 years of Addie's life, and yet we don't know much about Addie as a character. We only know her barest motivations, and her motivations really get kind of developed way later on into the story, so you don't really know why Addie chooses to keep going for a long portion of this book, and then when you find it out, it's just like, oh, that's it? That's all? Something also that colored me a lot on her character was she gives off major, huge, absolute, not like other girls vibes, and I get annoyed when, because this is a very valid critique, and if you didn't experience it this way, that's fine. But a lot of people will be like, well, she's not like other girls. She's got a curse on her. It's like, well, bitch, yeah, she's got a curse on her. Yeah, that makes her different, but she's still a woman. She's still a human being, and she doesn't have to judge other people and judge their plights and struggles and minimize those whilst she is going through traumatic events as well. There's a very specific example especially with Addie's past and at the very beginning of the book, that just kind of soured me on her character. And like, it's not like she ever really changes her tune or comes across that or confronts that within herself. The way she describes this other character who's supposed to be her friend is like awful. And it's like, like, you lived in a small village in 1700s France and this girl is married with children. Like, is that really the worst fucking thing in the world? And if it is the worst thing in the world for you, you still don't have to judge others for choosing to take that path. It's just like, really, you don't have to add that. Or you could have Addie confront that later on, but she doesn't. And it's annoying. Actually, I'm not done with that portion. I'm still annoyed about it. I just couldn't get over the fact that she's presented to us as if she's supposed to be likable and sympathetic when she chose to make a deal and yet decides to pass judgment on people who choose to conform to societal norms in a small village in France. And like, this book is supposed to be like, Addie's supposed to be this like revolutionary feminist. Like, she's like, I don't want to be married at 1700s France, which, fine. You still don't have to judge others for it. I didn't know if I was going to say this, but I think I am. It's a very white feminist lens to take, and frankly, this whole book, came across a little bit as white feminist at best. This is not as intersectional as it wants to be. We have a lot of queerness, which I love. Basically queerness everywhere, which is great. But this is definitely written from a lens of privilege, and it bothered me. Again, with Addie's struggles being presented as like, look, isn't this the worst thing that could happen to a person? And while the circumstances of her curse are tragic, there is tragedy everywhere. And the fact that there is like no acknowledgement over world events basically at all throughout this story, I couldn't get over that. I'm reading it going like, I'm sorry, are you not going to really discuss world wars? Or you're not going to discuss, I don't know, slavery? Or just like these awful experiences? And like, Addie is so self-involved, motivated by spite and like clouded by that. And she's supposed to be the ultimate sympathetic character. Like, it just, things were not adding up for me. There is a review that I really, really liked by ANT. I follow her blog and on Twitter, and she wrote on Goodreads a really good review for this and why she really disliked it. And she specifically talked about the lack of like people of color and acknowledgement there, and that's not something really I should speak to, but even I noticed the very privileged lens this was written by, and the very like white feminist thing that was going on here. So please give a look to her review. I really appreciated it, and it's very well done. Our other main perspective, Henry, he's just bland. I couldn't pick him out in a crowd. He likes to read and he likes school. The only thing that I really appreciated from his character was the very real and upsetting depiction of mental health and the struggles that one faces with that. That, obviously, I sympathize with him, and his struggles with that were incredibly difficult to read, and I do sympathize with Henry for that. But Henry also, his character was written almost in a way where it's like, isn't that the most tragic thing that's happened to him? And like, look, it's so difficult. And yes, it is difficult. I do acknowledge that. But the lack of acknowledgement of like anything else, like, it just wasn't working for me. As I'm discussing this all over the place, I'm talking plot, writing, everything. This is not a very coherent or linear, I guess, review. That's not the word I want, but we'll move on. There was such a lack of acknowledgement of other characters, other struggles, anything else, and our characters are so self-involved that they can't acknowledge anything that's happening really to anyone else, and it was a big sore spot for me. Specifically, for examples, there's one mention of Addie being like thrown into a prison, I think during World War II, but she gets out of it, she gets rescued, and then doesn't look back, doesn't glance back, doesn't do anything to possibly help other people that are in just as terrible as the position as her. And then at the very end of the book, which I'm not going to spoil, there's talking about how her life was so great and she's done all these things, and she was like apparently a message runner during like World War I or something for the resistance, but we never see those things. And so Addie just comes across as like not self-aware at all or very caring for others, and she's incredibly unempathetic. I'm still talking about characters apparently, but the devil character, Luke, he was pretty cool. He was pretty compelling. And his sort of foil with Addie was probably the most compelling dynamic and part of the story itself. I wish maybe it leaned into that a little bit more, the story. I think there was a couple different stories or ideas going on, and V.E. Schwab sort of needed to pick a path, because the two intermingled together I don't think particularly work. Which, you know what? That's a great transition into plot, because the plot was sparse, lacking, and a bit like scattered and all over the place. I could never really get an idea over what V.E. Schwab was intending with the story in terms of the plot. Like, there were two very main story threads, and you think it's going to be one thing for a long time, but then things kind of get thrown at you, I don't know, 2/3 in the way of the book, and you're like, oh, that's what we're going for, that's what we're intending. And then the ending sort of tries to wrap them all together, and it was not well done or unsatisfying on my end. I do think the first half was a lot stronger, and once the romantic elements get introduced, that's where the story starts to crash and burn. So, editing me from the future. There is a key aspect that I forgot to mention during this review, and I'm kicking myself for now, because I have to do the added element in here. Can you guess what? I didn't like the romance. Are we surprised? Absolutely not. The romance in here is weird, and it doesn't feel fully fleshed out, or like that V.E. Schwab actually tried to have a romance in here. Although everyone's pitching it as like this super romantic book, I guess it's the ending kind of undoes a lot of the romantic stuff, in my opinion. I understand truly why the two of them are attracted to one another because of their circumstances and why they are so interested in one another, but the romance wasn't like amazing by any stretch of the imagination. I do think it was really compelling and emotional to watch Addie realize the terms of her curse and what she had gotten herself into, and watching her sort of bend and mold the limitations of her curse and figure out where she can push the limit. That stuff was really interesting and compelling, and as much as I don't like Addie as a character, I'm a human being. I can empathize with her very upsetting circumstances, and that stuff, watching her struggle, was the most where I could relate, empathize, and like Addie as a character, because for the most part, obviously, we know I didn't like her. And I guess this is where I'm going to discuss the elements of her curse, because her curse actually I thought was interesting and cool. There are some nitpicky things that you could choose to get into, but I don't care. Like, she's cursed to be forgotten, and the ramifications of the curse, I like the way that V.E. Schwab explored that. I don't care about the nitpicks of her curse. If this maybe wouldn't work, like, who cares? Her curse was cool, and the way that V.E. Schwab wrote about it and navigated it, that stuff I actually liked. That was cool and inventive. And initially, again, this goes back to, I think the first half is stronger. I liked the back and forth, the flipping with timelines, and I thought it was excellently well done in the first half, but it really does lose steam in the second half, and there were elements or flashbacks that didn't really seem relevant or needed. It just like, she's like, oh, we need a flashback here, flip. And the ending I also had issue with, who's surprised? It was so weird. It was such like out of left field. We have this sort of meta element that I just don't like. I don't like when things get meta about books. In general, it's whatever. But then like the very final scene was so awkward and weird, and I don't know. I don't know if it like dumps down to the reader or is kind of a weird retcon. Like, it just, the very end, I didn't like, and it's too hard to say without spoilers. So, okay. And so for the writing, I feel like I've been ranting for a lot longer than I have intended. And that's the issue with being really conflicted over a book. But the writing itself was well done. V.E. Schwab's prose, I don't think I've ever come across a V.E. Schwab book where her prose has been better. Like, line by line, like in the technical aspects of the story, the writing is really lovely. It's not like super purple prosy, but there is a lot of atmosphere. I guess the best way to describe overall my feelings on this story was that it's like this great, huge, large painting. And when you zoom in to certain aspects of this painting, you see really, really beautiful things, but you zoom out and it's not a cohesive piece of artwork. And so therefore, like, you just don't know where to look. You don't know what to focus on. Thematically speaking, I think this falls flat. It flubs it. I think she was trying to go for a lot of stuff about like legacy and what does it mean to live, but I don't think they were explored particularly very well. I think the themes would have been a bit better done if she chose to cut the final scene entirely. Then it could have been like focusing more on legacy and what does it mean to leave your mark and that kind of stuff, but the end kind of sort of retcons it or changes it really, really weirdly. I don't know. I think V.E. Schwab was trying to be like, oh, I'm saying so much, but I didn't get it. I will be perfectly honest though, maybe it's because I disliked the characters so much that I couldn't really see what she was trying to go for in terms of her themes, but like the characters didn't work. Therefore, her themes didn't work to me, and I can't say it better than that. Overall, I think the story is skin deep and surface level. I think Schwab only basically barely skimmed the surface on top of these very complex themes she was attempting to display through her characters, and I don't think she was successful. The writing itself was pretty. The plot and the curse, while interesting, the characters that they involve are lacking. This story was incredibly frustrating, and frankly, I'm really fucking glad to be done discussing this book in this review, because it's kind of like a mindfuck. Like, I don't know how to feel about this book anymore. I gave this book 3 stars. It's the most frustrating rating, and this book was pretty freaking frustrating, so I think it's an apt rating. I didn't like the book that much, but there are elements and things going for it. It supremely didn't work for me. If you really liked it, I'm glad. Trust me, because I'm tired of like being like, I like this, but this stuff's not great. I like this, but whatever. Like, I'm tired of being conflicted over this story. I really hope you do enjoy it if you plan to pick it up. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of The Invisible Life of Addie Larue. I'm sure that would be a very interesting discussion, but as always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. I hope this review is not 500 years long, but I think it is.